Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand before a doorway that leads into the most legendary labyrinth in history, the Labyrinth of Crete? Picture the scene, the stone gate towers above you, carved with symbols worn down by time. The torches flicker against the rough walls, casting shapes that almost look alive. Your chest tightens not just because of fear, but because of curiosity. What lies inside? And the bigger question, if you step forward, would you ever walk back out? But hold that thought. Before we step inside together, do me a favor, tap the like button, tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and subscribe to this channel. I promise it only takes a second, and it means you will always have a guide for journeys like this, journeys where myth, history, and mystery blend into one. Ready? Then let us open the door. The first thing you notice is the smell. Damp stone, earth that has not seen the sun in thousands of years, and a faint trace of salt carried in from the Aegean Sea. The walls stretch so high that they seem to swallow the light from your torch. You glance back just once, but already the entrance feels farther away than it should be, as if the labyrinth is alive, shifting behind you to seal you inside. It is easy to laugh now. Come on, how bad could it be? Just walk left, right, and eventually you will find the exit. That is what we tell ourselves when we think of mazes in cornfields or amusement parks. But here, every hallway looks the same. Every shadow feels heavier. And somewhere deep inside, you know this is not just stone and mortar. This is a prison designed by Daedalus, the greatest engineer of the ancient world. And his one instruction from King Minos was clear: make it impossible to escape. The Greeks believed the labyrinth was more than architecture. It was a trap for the mind. Step far enough in, and you would not just lose your way. You would lose yourself. The turns would repeat. The walls would hum with strange vibrations. Some said that if you listened carefully, you could hear the distant breathing of the beast at the center, guiding you deeper with every step. And if you are wondering, no, Google Maps won't save you here. Even the best GPS would just keep recalculating. Turn left. No, wait. Rerouting. Please turn left again. And then comes the question, what would you do? Would you keep moving, hoping for a miracle? Would you try to carve marks into the walls? Would you sit down, refusing to play the game of the maze? Or would you whisper to yourself, like the Athenians once did, that death might be easier than wandering forever? That is why the Labyrinth of Crete is more than just a myth. It is a mirror. It asks you not only if you can escape stone walls, but whether you can escape your own fears, doubts, and the darkness waiting inside you. Tonight, you will walk those halls. You will hear the whispers, feel the shifting ground beneath your feet, and realize that the real monster might not be the Minotaur at all. It might be the hopelessness of never finding a way out. Imagine yourself stepping deeper into the torchlit corridors. The walls close in like silent witnesses, and your mind drifts back to the story of how this impossible labyrinth came to be. Because no prison builds itself. Behind every maze, there is always a master, and behind this one, there was a king. His name was Minos. Minos was not just any king. He was the son of Zeus himself, or so the legend says. In Crete, he ruled with authority that reached beyond politics. He was both a ruler and a bridge between men and gods. The Cretans believed their king had divine approval, and Minos, proud and ambitious, was determined to prove it. He prayed to Poseidon, god of the sea, asking for a sign that he had been chosen to rule. Poseidon answered. From the waves, a magnificent white bull emerged, a beast of beauty and power, its horns like crescents of ivory. The bull was meant to be sacrificed in Poseidon's honor. But here's where the curse began. Minos looked at the bull and thought, no, this is too perfect, too majestic to give away. And so he tricked the god of the sea. Instead of offering the sacred bull, he hid it away and sacrificed another animal in its place. Clever, perhaps, but with the gods, cleverness is often punished more harshly than stupidity. Poseidon's wrath was legendary, and it was slow, cruel, and precise. He would not strike Minos directly. Instead, he cursed the king's household, and the curse was unsettling. Minos's wife, Pasiphae, fell under a terrible spell of unnatural desire. She longed for the very bull that Minos had refused to sacrifice. The story sounds grotesque, absurd even, but this is how myths often worked, exaggeration to capture a moral truth. In the end, Pasiphae gave birth to something neither fully human nor fully beast. That was the Minotaur. And so the shame of one man's pride became the terror of an entire kingdom. The creature was uncontrollable, too strong to kill, too monstrous to parade before the people. So Minos sought a solution. He called upon the greatest inventor of the age, Daedalus. His command was simple but chilling: build a prison so complex, so disorienting, that no one who entered could ever escape. A structure that was both cage and curse, to hide the living embodiment of divine punishment. Thus, the labyrinth was born. Here is the question for you: was Minos a victim of divine cruelty, or an architect of his own downfall, if he had simply obeyed Poseidon? None of this would have happened. But then again, had he obeyed, there would be no labyrinth, no Minotaur, and no story to tell. Maybe myths remind us of this. Greatness and ruin often spring from the same choice. And as you wander these echoing corridors, you realize something. The walls are not just stone. They are pride, deception, and punishment, carved into architecture. Every twist of the passage is a reminder that one king's arrogance can shape the destiny of generations. And tonight, you walk inside his curse. Every great prison has its architect, and in the story of the labyrinth, that architect was Daedalus. If Minos was the king who demanded the impossible, then Daedalus was the man who delivered it. But here's the irony: in trying to build a prison for a monster, he ended up building a prison for himself. Daedalus was not just a craftsman. In Greek myth, he was the Leonardo da Vinci of his age, a mind far ahead of his time. He could carve statues so lifelike they seemed to breathe. He created tools and mechanisms that dazzled the world. Some even said he invented the saw by studying the spine of a fish. In every story, he is depicted as a man whose brilliance had no equal. And it was this brilliance that caught the attention of King Minos. Minos gave Daedalus a task that seemed impossible: build me a cage that no one can escape. Build me a place to hide my shame and contain my curse. Most men would have laughed or begged to be excused. But Daedalus accepted, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of fear. And so he designed the labyrinth. Picture it: miles of stone corridors, twisting and turning upon themselves like a living thing. Some say he used advanced geometry. Others say he relied on the natural caves of Crete, expanding them until they became an endless puzzle. But the design was more than physical. Daedalus understood psychology. He knew that humans look for patterns, for symmetry, for something that makes sense. So he created passages that almost made sense, just enough to trick the mind into false confidence. Imagine walking for hours, convinced you are making progress, only to arrive at the exact place you started. That was Daedalus's genius. But genius comes with a price. Once the labyrinth was complete, Minos realized the truth: if Daedalus had built it, then Daedalus also knew how to escape it. And a king who relied on secrets could not afford to leave such knowledge in another man's hands. So Minos locked Daedalus away in Crete, making the architect of freedom into a prisoner of his own creation. It is a cruel irony, is not it? The man who designed wings of imagination was denied the sky. The man who gave shape to escape was himself denied escape. Perhaps this is why the myth resonates with us. How many times have you, in your own life, built a prison of your own making, a choice, a mistake, a promise, something that once seemed clever, but now traps you? And yet, Daedalus's story does not end in despair. For while the king could chain his body, he could not chain his mind. From his cell, Daedalus began to dream, not of stone corridors, but of the sky above them. Soon, he would craft wings, and soon, he and his son Icarus would attempt the most daring escape of all. But that is a story for later. For now, remember this: the labyrinth was not just a monster's prison. It was also the prison of the man who built it. Step carefully now. The further you walk into the shadows of the labyrinth, the louder the silence becomes. And then, faint at first, you hear it. a sound that does not belong to stone or footsteps, a heavy breath, ragged, almost animal, a scrape of hoof against stone. The hairs on your neck rise. You realize you are not alone. This is the creature that gave the labyrinth its soul of terror, the Minotaur, half man, half bull, a being born not of love or nature, but of punishment and curse. Ancient storytellers described him with the body of a man, muscular, towering, human in form, but crowned with the head of a bull, horns sharp as spears, eyes glowing with hunger. He was the ultimate outsider, too monstrous for the world of men, too human for the world of beasts. Imagine what it meant to live as such a creature. No family, no belonging, only the dark corridors of stone, and the occasional screams of those sent inside as sacrifices. Some say the Minotaur was mindless, nothing more than an engine of violence. Others believed he had a cruel intelligence, as though he understood the curse that shaped him. Maybe that is the scariest version, a monster who knows he is a monster. For the Athenians, the Minotaur was the nightmare of empire. Every 9 years, King Minos demanded a tribute, 7 boys and 7 girls, sent from Athens to be cast into the labyrinth. They were not warriors. They were not armed. They were simply youths chosen by lot, walking into darkness they could never escape. For the people of Athens, the Minotaur was not just a beast. It was a symbol of humiliation, of slavery, of helplessness before Crete's power. Now imagine yourself as one of those 14. You hear the shuffling in the distance, the low snort echoing off the walls. You know something is hunting you, and there is no way out. You clutch the torch, but its light feels like a cruel joke. It only shows you what is about to kill you. Your heartbeat matches the rhythm of hooves on stone. Do you run, do you hide, or do you stand and face a creature that should not exist? The Minotaur is more than just a monster in a myth. He is the embodiment of fear itself. Fear of what is unnatural. Fear of punishment from the gods. Fear of being lost with no escape. And maybe, if we are honest, fear of what lives inside us all, the part that is animal, raw, hungry, and uncontrollable. Every culture invents monsters, but the Minotaur is unique because he was locked inside a maze. He is not just chasing you. He is forcing you to confront yourself. And as you take another cautious step down the passage, the thought crosses your mind, maybe the Minotaur is still here. Not in Crete, but in your life. Your choices, your failures. The beast in the dark is not always out there. Sometimes it is within. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the city of Athens, long before democracy, long before philosophers debated under olive trees. The people lived under a shadow, and that shadow stretched all the way across the sea, to Crete, to King Minos, and to the monster within his labyrinth. Every 9 years, the Athenians faced their most dreaded ritual. 14 youths, 7 boys and 7 girls, were chosen by lot. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. They were ordinary young people, just like you might see in a marketplace today, laughing, carrying baskets, dreaming of love, hoping for a future, until their names were called. Then, their laughter turned to silence, their futures to ash. The chosen ones were put on a ship bound for Crete. Imagine the scene on the docks. Families clutching each other, mothers collapsing in grief, fathers cursing the gods for their cruelty. Some prayed for storms to sink the ships before they arrived. Others whispered desperate bargains to Athena, to Apollo, to any god who might intervene. But the gods were silent. The tribute had to be paid. And when the ship reached Crete, the ritual continued. The youths were marched through the streets, their heads held low, while the Cretans looked on, half with pity, half with pride. For the people of Crete, this ritual was proof of their dominance. Athens, proud Athens, was reduced to a vassal state, humiliated by the sacrifice of its children. The walk through Knossos was a theater of power. Finally, the gates of the labyrinth would open. The air inside was heavy with dampness, the torches flickering like dying stars. The young Athenians would step across the threshold, one after another, swallowed by the stone corridors. And then, silence. No screams escaped the walls. No cries for help reached the sky. To those outside, it was as though the labyrinth devoured them whole. But here's where the story grows darker. Some ancient writers believed the sacrifices were not just myth, but a distorted memory of real rituals. Across the ancient world, human sacrifice was not unknown. Could it be that beneath the legend, Athens truly did send youths to Crete, not to face a monster, but to face death as part of some grim ceremony? If so, the Minotaur may have been less of a creature and more of a symbol, a way of cloaking brutal politics in the language of myth. Still, for the Athenians, the meaning was the same. Whether monster or ritual, the outcome was terror. Each tribute was a reminder that their city was powerless, their children disposable, their prayers unanswered. And each step inside the labyrinth was a step into a darkness no one had ever escaped. So let me ask you, if your city demanded such a sacrifice, and your name was chosen, how would you face it? Would you scream and resist, or would you walk forward with dignity? Would you cling to hope that somehow, against all odds, you might survive? Or would you accept that in the belly of the maze, all hope is devoured? In every story of despair, there comes a glimmer of hope. And for the Athenians, that hope took the form of a young prince, Theseus. He was the son of King Aegeus of Athens, though some whispered he might have divine blood in his veins, like so many heroes of Greece. Brave, strong, and restless, Theseus grew up listening to tales of the Minotaur and the endless sacrifices demanded by Crete. And when the time came for another tribute, he did something no one else dared to do. He volunteered. Imagine that moment. The city in mourning, the ship prepared to sail, and a young man stepping forward, not because his name was drawn, but because he chose it. Theseus promised his father that he would slay the beast and end the cycle of terror. Aegeus tried to stop him, but Theseus was resolute. He boarded the ship with the other youths, a sword hidden among the cargo, and a secret plan in his heart. When the Athenians arrived in Crete, the city buzzed with whispers. A foreign prince had come, not as a victim, but as a challenger. And among those who heard of his bravery was Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. She was captivated, not just by his courage, but by his presence. Some say it was love at first sight, others say the gods touched her heart. Whatever the reason, Ariadne could not bear to see Theseus thrown to the Minotaur. So she approached him in secret. By torchlight, she offered him a simple gift, a ball of thread. First, Theseus laughed. A thread against a monster. But Ariadne explained, tie it to the entrance, unwind it as you go deeper, and follow it back to escape. In a place designed to strip away direction and hope. This humble string became a lifeline. Ariadne's gift was not just practical. It was symbolic. It was trust. It was love. Picture Theseus stepping into the labyrinth, the thread tied firmly in his hand. Each step took him further from light, further from safety, until the darkness seemed endless. The smell of the beast grew stronger. His torch flickered. The sound of breathing echoed from the walls. And then, in the deepest chamber, the two finally met. The fight between man and monster was said to shake the stones themselves. The Minotaur charged, horns glinting, hooves striking sparks against the floor. Theseus leapt aside, his sword flashing. The clash was not just physical, it was symbolic. Man versus beast, order versus chaos, civilization versus curse. In the end, Theseus drove his blade into the Minotaur's heart, and the beast fell, shaking the labyrinth with its death. And yet, the true miracle was not the victory itself, but the escape. Without Ariadne's thread, Theseus would have been lost forever, another skeleton in the stone. But with it, he retraced his steps, each turn pulling him closer to the light. When he emerged, he carried not only his own life, but the freedom of Athens. For the first time, the ship would sail home without tribute, and the cycle of sacrifice was broken. But here's the deeper question. Was it Theseus who killed the Minotaur, or was it Ariadne who saved him? Heroes often claim the glory, but sometimes the quiet act of love. The gift of a thread makes all the difference. And perhaps that is the lesson. No matter how strong you are, you cannot escape the labyrinth alone. Every hero's triumph comes with a shadow, and for Theseus, that shadow was betrayal. The story of the labyrinth does not end with the death of the Minotaur. It ends with a broken promise, a lonely shore, and a woman left behind. Remember Ariadne, the princess who risked everything for love. Without her, there would have been no escape, no victory, no Athens freed from tribute. She gave Theseus the thread. She guided him through the darkness, and she stood ready to leave her home, her family, her crown, all for him. Imagine the courage it took. Imagine the faith. When Theseus and the freed youths boarded their ship, Ariadne was with them. The plan was simple: they would sail away together back to Athens, and she would become his queen. At least that is what she believed. And for a while, the dream seemed real. The ship cut across the Aegean, the horizon wide with promise. Ariadne must have thought, I have chosen love, and love has chosen me. But then came the island of Naxos. There, in the hush of dawn, Theseus made his choice. He left Ariadne sleeping on the shore, abandoned without a word. When she woke, the sails of his ship were already fading into the horizon. Alone, betrayed, heartbroken, Ariadne cried out, not just to the waves, but to the gods themselves. And the gods answered. In some versions of the myth, Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, found her. He lifted her from despair, made her his bride, and set her crown among the stars as a constellation. A tragic ending transformed into divine destiny. But in other versions, her story ends only in sorrow. The details shift depending on who tells it, but the betrayal remains constant. Why did Theseus leave her? Ancient storytellers give different reasons. Some say he feared what his father would think of him bringing home the daughter of his enemy. Others suggest he grew cold, his passion fading once the danger had passed. Still others claim it was the will of the gods, that Ariadne's fate was always to belong to Dionysus. Whatever the reason, the image is the same: a woman who gave everything, left with nothing. This is the part of the story that lingers, is not it? Heroes slay monsters, yes, but they also break hearts. And sometimes the wound left by betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. Ariadne's abandonment is not just a tale of love lost. It is a reminder that even in myth, humans are flawed, selfish, and often cruel. As you stand in the echoing halls of the labyrinth, you might realize something. Escape comes at a price. Theseus gained his freedom, his glory, and his city's salvation, but he lost his honor. And Ariadne, in her loneliness, reminds us of a truth far darker than any monster. The monsters outside us are easier to fight than the betrayals we carry inside. So let me ask you, if you were Theseus, would you have left her? Or if you were Ariadne, would you ever forgive him? Up to this point, our journey has been filled with myth, legend, and the echo of stories told by poets and priests. But now, let us pause and ask a different kind of question. Did the Labyrinth of Crete actually exist? Or is it nothing more than a powerful metaphor wrapped in marble and imagination? The story leads us to Knossos, the heart of ancient Crete. In the early 20th century, an archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans unearthed the sprawling ruins of a palace there. What he found astonished the world: massive courtyards, endless passageways, staircases leading into darkness, and storage rooms that seemed to multiply without end. The palace was not a small structure. It stretched across several acres, a network of over 1,000 rooms. To walk through it was to feel lost, even with modern maps. Evans quickly linked Knossos to the legend of the labyrinth. He believed that the palace itself was the inspiration, that the ancient Athenians, hearing tales of its vast complexity, turned it into a myth of an inescapable maze. And indeed, the Minoan civilization named after King Minos himself thrived here, flourishing with art, trade, and ritual. On the palace walls, frescoes depicted bulls, leaping bulls, dancing bulls, sacred bulls. Could this obsession with bulls be the seed of the Minotaur myth? But archaeology is rarely so neat. Not everyone agrees with Evans. Some scholars argue that Evans let his imagination run wild, reconstructing the palace in ways that may not reflect its original design. Others point out that while Knossos is complex, it is not truly a labyrinth in the sense of endless corridors designed to confuse. It was a palace, a seat of power, not a monster's prison. And yet, the symbolism is hard to ignore. The word labyrinth itself may come from labris, the double axe, a sacred Minoan symbol. If so, the labyrinth was not just a place, but an idea, a symbol of divine power, carved into stone and memory. Then there is the psychological truth. Stand in the ruins of Knossos today, and you will feel it, the strange disorientation of the place. Corridors bend at odd angles. Rooms connect in ways that defy easy mapping. It is not hard to imagine how ancient visitors, wandering its halls, might have felt trapped, confused, even terrified. Add to that the ritual of bull leaping, the central role of sacrifice, and the shadow of Minoan dominance, and suddenly the myth of the Minotaur no longer feels so impossible. Of course, skeptics remain. Some say the labyrinth never existed at all, that it is purely symbolic, a story invented to explain political dominance and the cruelty of tribute. But whether or not the Labyrinth of Crete was real in stone, it is real in another way. It lives in human imagination, more powerful than any ruin. So as you picture the torchlight on those palace walls, the question remains, were you standing in a palace or a prison? Were you visiting the home of kings? Or the lair of monsters? The stones of Knossos do not answer. They simply whisper both truths at once. The myths all agree on one thing: once you entered the labyrinth, you never came back. But why? What made this maze so different from any other? After all, people have solved puzzles for thousands of years. Surely, if you just kept track of your steps, you could eventually find the way out. Right? The truth is more complicated and far more terrifying. First, there was the architecture itself. The labyrinth was not built like a playful garden maze with trimmed hedges and cheerful pathways. It was a fortress of stone, designed to bend the mind. Daedalus, its creator, understood something modern psychologists have only recently studied. Humans are hopelessly bad at navigating without landmarks. Strip away the sun, the stars, or even just a clear view of the horizon, and our brains begin to fail us. We walk in circles, convinced we are moving straight. Our sense of direction collapses. In the labyrinth, every corridor looked the same, every turn mirrored the last. You could walk for hours, thinking you were escaping, only to realize you had gone nowhere at all. Second, the atmosphere itself worked against you. Imagine the air, thick and damp, carrying echoes that warped and twisted. A single footstep could bounce off the walls, sounding like it came from behind when it was actually ahead. The drip of water might seem to lead you forward, only to lure you deeper into the trap. Darkness pressed in on every side, and torches burned low, making shadows dance in ways that confused the eye. Even today, scientists know that sensory deprivation, removing light, sound, and reliable cues, can quickly break the human mind. In the labyrinth, sensory confusion was the default. And then there was fear. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a compass that spins wildly, pointing nowhere. Imagine walking in circles, hearing the low growl of a beast echoing through the halls. Your pulse races, your breath shortens, your thoughts scatter. Every choice feels urgent, every wrong turn fatal. Panic makes people reckless, and recklessness makes people lost. That was the genius of the labyrinth. It did not just trap your body, it trapped your mind. But perhaps the cruelest trick of all was hope. At times, the labyrinth may have seemed to offer an exit, an archway, a shaft of light, a passage that felt new. Desperate, you would rush forward, only to find yourself back where you started. The exit nothing but another illusion. It is said that some victims stopped running entirely, sitting in despair until the Minotaur found them. In that moment, the maze had already won. Modern scientists might compare the labyrinth to a psychological experiment, a perfect storm of disorientation, sensory overload, and fear conditioning. But the Greeks did not need science to understand the horror. They knew that humans, stripped of guidance and plunged into chaos, could not endure. And they told the story not just as entertainment, but as a warning. Pride leads us into mazes. fear keeps us there, and only wisdom or divine help can guide us out. So why could not anyone escape? Because the labyrinth was not just walls of stone. It was walls of the mind. And no matter how fast your legs might carry you, your mind will always be the first to betray you. Why does the very idea of a labyrinth frighten us? It is, after all, only walls and paths. Yet from the moment you imagine yourself trapped in one, your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and your mind begins to race. The ancient Greeks may not have had words like cognitive science or neuroscience, but they understood the psychological terror that the labyrinth represented. And today, science confirms what mythology always knew: being lost can break the human spirit. Start with orientation. Human beings rely on memory and landmarks to build a mental map of the world. Take those away and something strange happens. Psychologists call it spatial disorientation. Without reliable cues, the brain begins to invent patterns where none exist. You think you have turned left when you have not. You imagine progress when you are only looping in circles. In experiments, even in open fields, blindfolded humans almost always walk in spirals. Now imagine the same effect magnified by stone walls, echoing footsteps, and the sound of your own heartbeat pounding like a drum. Then comes the stress response. The labyrinth was not simply confusing, it was threatening. Somewhere in the shadows, a predator waited. When fear activates the fight or flight system, the body floods with adrenaline. Your muscles tense, your vision narrows, and your decision-making falters. You do not think clearly when terrified. You think fast and often wrong. Every choice in the maze becomes a gamble, and fear weights the dice against you. And fear does more than confuse, it isolates. In modern psychology, we know that people in threatening environments often experience tunnel vision. Not just literally, but emotionally. They lose awareness of others, focus only on survival, and withdraw inward. Imagine the young Athenians, each thrown into the maze. Did they try to help one another, or did the terror make them scatter, each running blindly? Every friendship broken by panic. In that way, the Minotaur did not have to kill them all, the labyrinth itself destroyed their unity. There is another cruel trick the mind plays: expectation. When you are trapped, your brain starts creating false exits, convincing you that salvation is just around the corner. Each time the exit turns out to be nothing, hope crumbles a little more. Psychologists call this the cycle of hope and despair. It is why mazes in myths so often represent life itself. A series of turns where you think you see the way out, only to be cast back into darkness. And perhaps the deepest terror is identity. To be lost is not just to lose your way, it is to lose yourself. Who are you when you do not know where you are? Who are you when every step is meaningless? The Greeks wove this idea into their myth. The labyrinth was not just a place to get lost. It was a place where you, too, became lost, stripped of certainty, swallowed by confusion, dissolved into shadow. Modern psychologists might call it sensory disorientation, decision fatigue, or panic-induced collapse. But the ancients said it more poetically. The labyrinth steals your soul before the Minotaur steals your body. And as you walk its endless halls, you realize the walls are not just stone. They are the boundaries of your own mind. The Labyrinth of Crete may be the most famous, but it was not the only one. Across cultures and centuries, human beings have built their own mazes. Some of stone, some of ritual, some carved into myth. And though they look different on the surface, they all whisper the same message: to be human is to wander, to search, to lose and find ourselves again. Let us begin in Egypt. Ancient historians like Herodotus wrote of a massive labyrinth near the city of Crocodilopolis, in the region of the Fayum. He described it as surpassing even the pyramids, a structure with thousands of chambers, half above ground and half below. Priests led him through only part of it, but what he saw left him speechless. Endless rooms, winding corridors, and walls inscribed with sacred stories. Some scholars believe this was a mortuary temple complex, built not to trap, but to guide souls into the afterlife. Still, imagine walking through thousands of chambers. Would you not feel the same disorientation as in Crete? Travel now to Rome. The Romans loved mazes, but for different reasons. In their villas and gardens, intricate mosaic labyrinths were laid into the floors. These were not prisons but symbols, symbols of the soul's journey, of the path through chaos to order. One famous mosaic depicts a labyrinth with the Minotaur at its center, a playful echo of the Cretan myth. To step across such a floor was to remind yourself, life is a puzzle, and every step is part of the pattern. And then, far away in the Americas, the Hopi people of the Southwest created their own symbol, the Labyrinth of Life. Drawn as a winding spiral, it represented the journey of the human spirit, full of twists and trials, leading eventually to the center, a place of wisdom and rebirth. Unlike the Greek version, this labyrinth had no monster. Its challenge was existence itself. In Northern Europe, turf labyrinths were carved into the earth by hand. Villagers would walk them during festivals, sometimes as ritual dances, sometimes as games. In Scandinavia, sailors would walk labyrinths before setting out to sea, believing it would confuse evil spirits that tried to follow them. The act of tracing the winding path became a prayer for protection. Even in medieval cathedrals, labyrinths appeared. Perhaps the most famous is at Chartres Cathedral in France. There, on the stone floor, a great circular labyrinth still waits. Pilgrims would walk its winding path on their knees, treating it as a symbolic journey to Jerusalem, or as a way of enacting penance. To enter was to surrender to the long, confusing road of faith. What do all these labyrinths share? They are not just puzzles. They are reflections of the human condition. The Egyptians built them for the dead. The Greeks filled them with monsters. The Romans turned them into art. The Christians walked them as prayers. The Hopi drew them as the path of life. And each time, the message was the same: the labyrinth is the world itself. And maybe that is why the story of Crete resonates so strongly. It is not alone. It is part of a vast tradition of mazes that remind us life is complex. The path is never straight, and somewhere at the center waits a truth, whether monster or salvation, whether despair or wisdom. For the ancients, the labyrinth was never just stone and corridors. It was also a spiritual metaphor, a sacred pattern that carried meaning beyond walls. Across civilizations, labyrinths became symbols of faith, trial, and transformation. To walk a labyrinth was not simply to wander, it was to enter into a ritual of the soul. Let us return to the Greeks for a moment. To them, the labyrinth was a reminder of divine punishment, but also of human arrogance. It represented the boundary between the mortal and the divine, the place where men encountered gods, and monsters born of God's wrath. To step into the labyrinth was to step into the space between order and chaos, where faith was tested as surely as courage. But the Greeks were only the beginning. Centuries later, in the Christian Middle Ages, labyrinths appeared in cathedrals. Perhaps the most famous is at Chartres in France, where an enormous circular labyrinth is laid into the floor. Pilgrims would walk its winding path on their knees, treating the act as a symbolic pilgrimage to Jerusalem. For those who could not travel across seas, the labyrinth offered a spiritual substitute, a holy journey contained within sacred stone. To walk it was to pray with your body, each turn a confession, each step a step closer to grace. Other cathedrals followed. Reims, Amiens, and Lucca all built labyrinths into their design. Priests described them as a test of patience, a path of penance, or even a symbolic reenactment of Christ's journey. To walk the labyrinth was to surrender control, to admit that faith was not a straight line but a winding path filled with doubt and persistence. Meanwhile, far away in India, labyrinth-like patterns appear in Hindu and Buddhist mandalas. These sacred diagrams represent the universe, with winding pathways that lead inward toward enlightenment. Unlike the Greek labyrinth, these were not prisons but maps for meditation, for contemplation, for spiritual progress. To trace a mandala with the eyes or fingers was to journey through the cosmos itself, moving from illusion to truth. In Native American traditions, two labyrinths held power. The Tohono O'odham people used the man in the maze symbol, a figure standing at the entrance of a spiral labyrinth. Each turn of the path symbolized life's choices, challenges, and lessons, leading finally to the center, death, but also wisdom. The journey was not to escape the maze, but to complete it. So whether in Europe, Asia, or the Americas, labyrinths became more than architecture. They became prayers. They became metaphors for existence itself. Unlike mazes designed to trick, religious labyrinths often had only one winding path, confusing to the eye, but inevitable in destination. The lesson was clear: life may twist and turn, but if you keep walking, you will reach the center, where the divine waits. And here lies the paradox. In Crete, the labyrinth symbolized punishment, confusion, and terror. But in faith traditions, labyrinths became tools of peace, reflection, and transformation. The same pattern that once devoured victims became a pattern that saved souls. Perhaps that is why labyrinths remain powerful symbols. They embody both our deepest fears and our highest hopes. So next time you see a labyrinth in a church floor, or in a mandala, or carved into desert stone, ask yourself, is this a prison, or is it a path to freedom? Maybe, as in all great mysteries, it is both. What happens to your brain when you are trapped in a labyrinth? This is not just a poetic question. Modern neuroscience gives us real insight into what the Greeks may have intuited thousands of years ago. The maze is not only outside you, it is inside you. Let us begin with the hippocampus. This small structure, buried deep in the brain, is responsible for memory and spatial navigation. It is your internal compass, constantly creating maps of where you are. But the hippocampus needs reliable landmarks to function: mountains on the horizon, the position of the sun, even the smell of familiar places. In the labyrinth, none of these exist. The corridors repeat endlessly. The torchlight distorts vision. Every hallway smells the same. Deprived of cues, the hippocampus becomes confused, firing signals that lead you in circles. Then there is the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. When you feel fear, the amygdala floods your body with signals of danger. Your heart races, your breathing shortens, your muscles tighten. In small doses, this keeps you alive. But in the labyrinth, fear is constant. The amygdala becomes overactive, hijacking rational thought. Decisions are no longer calm or strategic, they are panicked, impulsive, desperate. You run toward noise instead of away from it. You turn down a corridor without thinking, and suddenly you are deeper in the trap. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that plans and reasons, tries to fight back. Tells you, stay calm, think logically, mark the walls. But fear erodes its control. Neuroscientists call this amygdala hijack, when raw emotion overwhelms rational thought. In the labyrinth, the brain itself becomes divided. One part trying to calculate, another screaming for survival. The result is chaos. Even the reward system of the brain plays a role. Every time you think you have found an exit, dopamine surges, giving you a burst of hope. But when that exit turns out to be false, dopamine crashes, plunging you into despair. This cycle repeats endlessly: hope, despair, until the brain is exhausted. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. In experiments, animals placed in inescapable mazes eventually stop trying to escape. They lie down, waiting for the inevitable. In Greek myth, many victims of the labyrinth may have done the same. Now imagine adding the Minotaur. Not only are you lost, but something is hunting you. Predatory stress changes the brain even more dramatically. Your senses become hypersensitive. You hear too much, see too much, imagine movement where there is none. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods your system, damaging memory and impairing judgment. In the labyrinth, you are not just fighting walls. You are fighting your own biology. Modern neuroscience tells us what the Greeks told through story. The greatest trap of the labyrinth is not its walls, but your mind. When deprived of certainty, overwhelmed by fear, and teased by false hope, the brain collapses. And once the brain collapses, escape is no longer possible. So, when Theseus walked into the labyrinth, thread in hand, he was not only defying a monster, he was defying the very architecture of the human brain. That may be the greatest heroism of all. It is easy to talk about the labyrinth as myth, as history, as something that happened long ago to nameless figures. But let us pause for a moment. Let us imagine that it is you standing at the threshold. No Theseus, no Ariadne, no thread, just you and the endless corridors ahead. The stone walls tower over you, cold and damp, their surfaces slick with moisture. Your torch sputters, and every flicker of light casts shapes that almost seem alive. Behind you, the gate has shut. You are inside. There is no way back. What do you do first? Do you start running, hoping that speed will save you, or do you move slowly, counting every step, trying to memorize turns? Imagine the pressure of knowing that somewhere in the dark, a beast is waiting. Every echo could be its hoof. Every shadow could be its horns. Would you try to fight? With what weapon? A stone, your fists, even a sword would feel useless against a creature twice your size, bred from divine wrath. Perhaps you would tell yourself, I will outsmart it. I will set a trap. But how long could you think clearly in the choking dark? How long before panic eats away at reason? You might try to leave marks on the walls, scratches, small piles of stones, anything to remind yourself of where you have been. But then you realize the cruel trick. In this damp, shifting maze, your marks might fade, be erased, or worse, lead you in circles. You might follow your own trail right back into danger. What about climbing? Could you scramble up the walls, try to rise above the trap? The ancients would have laughed at that thought. The walls were said to be impossibly smooth, impossibly high, as if they were carved to mock your desperation. There was no up, no out, only forward, deeper, darker. And then there is the most terrifying option of all, standing still. What happens if you stop? The silence grows heavier. The dark presses closer. Your mind begins to whisper, it is behind you. It is waiting. Standing still may feel safer, but in the labyrinth, it is simply waiting for death to find you. So what would you do? Would you gamble on courage, charging blindly through the corridors? Would you gamble on caution, moving slowly, quietly, step by step? Or would you do what so many before you must have done, collapse into despair, praying for a miracle that never comes? This is why the labyrinth remains such a powerful story. It forces you to ask not how Theseus survived, but how you would have tried. It is a test of imagination, of courage, of fear. The Minotaur may be a monster of myth, but the choices are real. In every life, we face our own labyrinths, moments where no exit is visible, where fear stalks us in the shadows. And in those moments, the question is always the same: what do you do when there is no way out? For thousands of years, the Labyrinth of Crete has haunted the imagination. But in modern times, scholars, scientists, and storytellers have asked, what if the myth hides a different truth? Could the story of the Minotaur be less about monsters and more about politics, memory, or even technology far ahead of its time? One theory points to politics. The Athenians told this story, remember, not the Cretans. To them, the labyrinth may have been a way to dramatize their subjugation to Crete. The tribute of youths, the humiliation of sacrifice, the horror of being trapped. These could all be metaphors for Athens' political dependence before it rose to power. By telling the story of a monster and a maze, Athens cast itself as the eventual hero that overcame tyranny. It was not just a myth, it was propaganda. Another theory looks to memory. Archaeologists note that ancient myths often preserve distorted echoes of real events. Some suggest that the Minotaur may have been a memory of human sacrifices tied to bull cults in Minoan Crete. The labyrinth could have been the great palace of Knossos itself, with its thousands of rooms and its frescoes of bulls. Over generations, memory twisted ritual into myth, and real corridors became the endless maze of legend. But then there are stranger theories. Some researchers have argued that the labyrinth might represent advanced knowledge, geometry, astronomy, or even technology. Daedalus, after all, was a symbol of human ingenuity. Could the labyrinth have been an allegory for the complexity of knowledge itself? A puzzle only solvable with wisdom and invention. Others push further, suggesting the myth encodes astronomical patterns. The turns of the maze reflecting the paths of the stars, the Minotaur symbolizing a destructive cosmic force, and the thread of Ariadne serving as the guiding line of reason. And of course, in modern psychology, the labyrinth has taken on new meaning. Therapists use it as a metaphor for depression, anxiety, or trauma, states of mind where escape feels impossible. The Minotaur becomes the embodiment of one's inner demons, and Ariadne's thread the fragile lifeline of hope, love, or therapy that leads you back out. To walk the labyrinth, in this sense, is to walk through suffering toward healing. There are even fringe theories, whispered on the edges of archaeology, that suggest the labyrinth was real in ways we cannot yet imagine. A vast underground complex, a forgotten technology, or even contact with something not of this world. These claims stretch the limits of evidence, but they show how powerful the story remains. The labyrinth refuses to be pinned down. It is history, myth, metaphor, and mystery all at once. So which theory is true? Perhaps all of them, in part. The labyrinth is a puzzle that adapts to whoever enters it. To politicians, it is tyranny. To archaeologists, it is memory. To psychologists, it is the mind. To dreamers, it is eternity. And maybe that is the greatest truth. The labyrinth survives not because it was real in stone, but because it is real in meaning. The story of the labyrinth did not end in ancient Greece. It has continued to echo across centuries, reshaped by every generation. From books to movies, video games to music, the image of the maze and the monster within still fascinates us today. Why? Because the labyrinth speaks to something timeless. The fear of being trapped, the hope of escape, and the thrill of confronting the unknown. Consider literature. Writers have long borrowed the labyrinth as a metaphor for complexity and confusion. Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine master of philosophical fiction, returned again and again to mazes in his stories. For him, the labyrinth was not just stone corridors, it was the human mind, infinite twisting, filled with paradox. In one tale, the Minotaur becomes a lonely, almost sympathetic figure, trapped as much as those who enter. In another, the labyrinth has no walls at all, only the vastness of the universe itself. Then there is film. Perhaps the most iconic is Jim Henson's Labyrinth 1986, where David Bowie plays the Goblin King and a young girl must navigate a magical maze to rescue her baby brother. The film blends whimsy with menace, echoing the Greek myth while creating something entirely new. More recently, films like Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro have used the maze as a symbol of imagination, trauma, and resistance against tyranny. In each, the labyrinth is not merely a setting, it is a mirror of the character's inner journey. Video games, too, have embraced the maze. From the endless dungeons of The Legend of Zelda to puzzle-driven worlds in Portal or Dark Souls, players are constantly placed inside labyrinths, both literal and symbolic. The Minotaur, or some version of it, often lurks as the final test, a monster waiting at the center. Gamers know well the sensation the Greeks described, the disorientation of twists and turns, the thrill of finally finding the way out. Even music has taken inspiration. Rock bands have titled albums Labyrinth, rappers have used the Minotaur as metaphor for struggle, and classical composers have written pieces evoking the twisting pathways of the maze. In all forms, the labyrinth becomes shorthand for challenge, confusion, and creativity. Why does it endure so powerfully? Perhaps because each generation faces its own labyrinth. For the Greeks, it was tribute and terror. For the medieval faithful, it was sin and salvation. For us, it may be technology, politics, or the complexities of modern life. The maze is the perfect metaphor, overwhelming, intricate, frustrating, and yet navigable if you find the right thread. And of course, the Minotaur never disappears. He is the boss monster at the end of the level, the villain in the shadows, the fear that keeps us moving forward. Sometimes he is literal, sometimes symbolic, but always he waits. And we, like Theseus, like every hero before us, must face him. So next time you read a novel, watch a movie, or play a game with a maze, remember you are not just enjoying entertainment. You are walking a path traced thousands of years ago, following echoes from Crete, still alive in the culture of today. What, in the end, does the labyrinth teach us? Myths endure not just because they entertain, but because they reveal truths about human life. The story of the labyrinth, the Minotaur, And the thread of Ariadne is more than an old tale. It is a map of lessons waiting to be traced. First, it warns us about pride. King Minos tried to hide his shame by building the labyrinth. In doing so, he only created more suffering, both for his people and for himself. Pride often builds prisons. How many times in our own lives do we construct elaborate walls to conceal our fears or mistakes, only to become trapped inside them? Second, it reminds us of sacrifice. The Athenians sending their youth to Crete speaks to the terrible cost of power and politics. Innocent lives are often the currency of empire. The myth asks us, what are we willing to give up, and who pays the price when rulers demand tribute? Third, the story highlights ingenuity. Daedalus designed the labyrinth, yes, but he also dreamed of wings. Theseus fought bravely, but without Ariadne's thread, courage alone would have failed. The lesson is clear. Survival requires not just strength, but creativity, trust, and cooperation. Sometimes the smallest tool, a string, can change the outcome of a battle. Fourth, it speaks to betrayal. Theseus abandoned Ariadne, and in doing so, revealed a truth we still see today: heroes are flawed, and victories are never pure. The myth does not let us escape the bitterness of human weakness. It forces us to confront the cost of broken promises. Fifth, the labyrinth is about fear itself. The corridors mirror our confusion. The Minotaur mirrors our inner demons. The thread mirrors our fragile hopes. Life itself is a labyrinth, a twisting path of choices, losses, and discoveries. You may feel lost, but every step still moves you forward. And sometimes what feels like a dead end is only a lesson in disguise. Finally, the myth tells us about freedom. The Athenians were freed from tribute, but Daedalus never truly escaped his own prison. Freedom is never simple, never complete. It requires courage, wisdom, and sometimes sacrifice. And even when we walk into the sunlight, the memory of the maze stays with us. Perhaps this is why the labyrinth still matters. It tells us that monsters are real, sometimes outside us, sometimes inside us. It tells us that no one escapes alone. Everyone needs a thread, a guide, a hand to hold. And it tells us that even in the darkest maze, there is always the possibility of finding light. So if you find yourself wandering through the twisting paths of life, remember Theseus, Ariadne, Daedalus, and the Minotaur. Remember that courage matters, but wisdom matters more. Remember that love can be a lifeline, but betrayal can wound deeper than horns. And above all, remember this: the maze may feel endless, but every labyrinth has a center, and every journey has a meaning. Thousands of years have passed since the first Greek bards told the tale of the Minotaur and the labyrinth. Civilizations have risen and fallen. Languages have changed. Empires have come and gone. And yet, this story of a monster, a maze, a hero, and a thread remains alive. Why, what gives it such enduring power? The first reason is universality. Everyone in every culture understands the fear of being lost. We have all wandered in darkness, unsure of the way forward. The labyrinth captures that feeling perfectly. It does not matter whether the maze is stone, forest, city, or even the tangled pathways of the mind. The experience of being trapped is timeless. The second reason is the monster. The Minotaur is unforgettable. Half human, half beast, he embodies the fear of the unnatural. But he also reflects us. The beast within is a theme that never grows old. Even in modern psychology, we speak of inner demons, instincts we cannot control, shadows we must confront. The Minotaur is not just out there, he is inside us. And that makes the myth eternal. The third reason is hope. For all its darkness, the story gives us Ariadne's thread, a fragile line of escape. The thread is love, ingenuity, trust, cooperation. It reminds us that even in the darkest maze, a lifeline exists. In every generation, people search for that thread in faith, in science, in friendship, in courage. The promise that there is a way out keeps the story alive. The fourth reason is adaptability. The labyrinth changes shape depending on who tells it. For the Greeks, it was political domination. For Christians, it became a path of penance. For modern artists, it is the complexity of the mind. For gamers, it is a dungeon filled with enemies. Every age rewrites the maze in its own image, and so it never dies. And finally, the story lives because it is a mirror. When you hear it, you do not just think of Crete, you think of yourself. You ask, what would I do? Could I survive? Would I be Theseus, Ariadne, or one of the nameless sacrifices? Myths that survive are the ones that make us look inward. And the labyrinth forces us to. So why does the story still live? Because we are still walking it. Every choice we make is another turn. Every fear we face is another shadow. Every thread of love or hope we hold is another chance at escape. The labyrinth is not just in Crete. It is everywhere. It is now. It is you. You may be wondering why spend so much time on a myth thousands of years old, because the labyrinth is not just ancient history. It is a living metaphor for the world we face today. Though we no longer send tributes to Crete or fear monsters lurking in the dark, we walk through labyrinths every single day. Think of technology. The internet, with its endless links, pathways, and distractions, is a labyrinth. You click one article, then another, and suddenly you are lost in a web of information, unsure where you began. The Minotaur may not be a beast this time, it may be misinformation, manipulation, or the endless scroll that devours your time. What is your Ariadne's thread? Perhaps discipline, fact-checking, or the reminder to step away. Think of careers. Modern work often feels like a maze, deadlines, hierarchies, choices, setbacks. You think you see the exit, the promotion, the success, only to find another corridor of challenges. Stress becomes the Minotaur. Burnout becomes the monster waiting at the center. And the thread, it might be balance, purpose, or the support of those who remind you that life is not only about achievement. Think of relationships. Love can be a labyrinth too. Misunderstandings, betrayals, distance, and longing twist around us. Sometimes the person we trust becomes the Minotaur, or perhaps we ourselves turn into the monster. And yet, the thread still exists: communication, forgiveness, or the courage to walk away when the maze is no longer worth the cost. Think of the mind. Anxiety, depression, trauma. These are labyrinths without stone, but their walls feel just as real. You search for exits, but they twist back into themselves. The Minotaur here is invisible, whispering that escape is impossible. Yet again, the thread is there. Therapy, friendship, medication, faith, or the simple act of holding on one more day. The point is this: the Labyrinth of Crete never truly vanished. It reshaped itself into the challenges of modern life. And each of us, in our own way, is still wandering inside. Some days we feel lost. Some days we hear the monster's breath close behind. But like Theseus, we are not entirely powerless. We carry threads, small, fragile, but real, that can guide us through. The myth endures not because it is old, but because it is true. Every era has its labyrinth. Every heart has its Minotaur. Every life has its thread. And the question remains the same as it did thousands of years ago. Will you give up, or will you keep walking until you find the light? And so, our journey through the labyrinth comes to an end. We have walked its endless corridors, faced its shadows, and confronted the Minotaur not only as a beast of legend, but as a reflection of our fears, our choices, and our humanity. Think back on what we have seen together. We began at the doorway, with the chill of stone and the dread of no return. We met Minos, deadless, and the tragic Minotaur itself. We followed the thread of Ariadne, we fought alongside Theseus, and we witnessed betrayal on a lonely shore. We paused with archaeologists among the ruins of Knossos, asked whether the maze was real, and listened as science, psychology, and neuroscience explained why escape was impossible. We wandered through history, Egypt, Rome, medieval cathedrals, Native American symbols, and saw that every culture has its own labyrinth. We watched the myth live on in literature, film, games, and music. And finally, we brought it back to ourselves, asking, what does it mean for us here and now? The answer is simple, yet infinite. The labyrinth is life. Its walls are the obstacles we face. Its turns are our decisions. Its shadows are our fears. And its thread, always fragile, always precious, is the love, wisdom, and courage that guide us through. You might never face a horned monster in a darkened maze, but you will face moments of confusion, despair, and fear. You will hear echoes that try to trick you. You will see false exits that tempt you, and you will feel at times that the walls are closing in. But remember, you are not alone. Others have walked before you. Others walk beside you, and you carry your own thread. So as we step out of the labyrinth together, I want to thank you. Thank you for listening, for walking these twisting passages of myth and meaning with me. Stories like this survive because of people like you, people who care, who wonder, who imagine. Before we go, I would like to ask you something. If you found yourself inside the Labyrinth of Crete, just you, the torchlight, and the monster, what would you do? Would you fight? Would you flee? Would you look for a thread? Or would you try to create one of your own? Share your answer in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey, please do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next adventure. There are many more myths, mysteries, and forgotten tales waiting for us. For now, take a breath, step back into the light, and remember, the labyrinth may never truly vanish, but neither will the courage to face it.